First of all, how do you expect to run an effective campaign when you're still in session and the Democrats have a huge challenge with the Rodney Tom coalition?
So the major restriction I have in this campaign is that as a legislator, I can't raise money while we're in session. But I don't believe money alone is the issue. I think there are other things I can do. I can go to forums like this. I'll be doorbelling in West Seattle tomorrow. I'm meeting constituents on the weekend. When I'm not on the floor in the evening, I'm on the phone calling people back in Seattle. So I think it is possible to conduct a campaign without simply raising money. Secondly, when I announced I had 1 week where I could raise money, and I, at least as of the last reporting, had raised more money than any of the other candidates and had more cash on hand. And I believe once the freeze is off and I'm able to raise money again, that I can go back to that level and be competitive on the fundraising side. But again, fundraising by itself isn't the answer. Obviously, the challenges in the legislature are huge, but the mayor is the mayor and he has to manage a city. Tim Burgess is a city council member and is involved in a very busy city council. So I believe that you can be in elective office and run for elective office at the same time. If not, then I would suggest that Bruce Harrell and Mike McGinn and Tim Burgess and I should all step down from our jobs. But I don't think we need to do that.
The city has a comprehensive plan, which is a product of the Growth Management Act. Are you familiar with that?
I am. In the 22 years ago, in 1991, I was hired by Martha Cho, and I worked on Martha's staff for her first 4 years. It's interesting. Also, 22 years ago, I met my partner Michael. So a very interesting year for me, 1991, 1992. When Martha went to the council in 1992, she chaired the Transportation Committee. I staffed her on the Transportation Committee, and the comprehensive plan was in the process of being put together at that point. It was initially developed at the department level, and then council staff, particularly central staff, and council members came in and made significant changes to that comprehensive plan to make it, I think, a far more manageable plan than the initial plan that was put out there. So yes, I am familiar with it because of my time of working in the city.
Why isn't Seattle better off with you fighting for us in Olympia than as our mayor?
That's a great question.
Yeah, you know, I went to Olympia 18 years ago, and I had never expected to stay that long. It took me a little longer to accomplish the things that I wanted to accomplish, but I would also offer you that as a reason to vote for me for mayor. Tenacity, 17 years to pass one bill, or stupidity, and that might be the reason not to vote for me. And I'm ready for that next challenge in my life. I think I didn't go to the Senate to be in the Senate and to be in Olympia for 18 years, and I am at that point where I want the next challenge. I'm ready for the next chapter. I accomplished things in Olympia that I never thought I would accomplish, and I want to try and do that same thing for the city of Seattle. You know, people said we absolutely were never going to be able to raise a gas tax in the state of Washington, but we did. People said that we would never be able to pass a budget that didn't decimate human services 3 years ago, but we did, and we had Republican votes that helped us. And people said 17 years ago that marriage was a freaky idea, and the people who came to Olympia to propose it were kind of freaky themselves, but we accomplished that as well. So I'm ready for that next challenge, and I want a city, I want to be mayor of a city that 4 years from now, people look to the city of Seattle and say, we are the model for policing. I want cities from around this country to come to Seattle and say, we have the model, we have the best approach to this. I want them to come and say that about how we manage growth and how we manage our environment, how we manage our aging infrastructure in light of climate change. And we, like everybody else, are subject to climate change. We saw that about 6 years ago during the flash flood in the Madison Valley, where a woman was killed in her basement. And why did that happen? That once in a 100-year storm, it happened like the second year in a row, and our infrastructure couldn't withstand it. I want us to be the model where people come back and say, we are the model about how you approach aging infrastructure. I want to be mayor, and I believe I can do as well in tying it back to the Senate when it comes to our school system. The mayor doesn't run the school system, and the city council doesn't run the school system. But I think we have to lead a civic discussion as mayor and as city council by engaging the citizens of this city, our 2 or 3 universities that want to participate, our community college system, and decide how we address some of the problems in our school system, how we partner with our school district, so that, again, people look to our urban school district not as a school district where we have one of the highest level of school-age kids in private schools, but where we have one of the highest level of school-age kids going back into the public schools.
Shifting back to the issue of transportation, there's a variety of questions. One is, how will you fund building sidewalks, which are very expensive? Will you impose a fee on bicycles to pay for bicycle infrastructure? And apparently in New Zealand and Queensland, Australia, they are looking at light rail and streetcars and realizing they might be too expensive as forms of public transit. Can you talk to those?
So there were several questions. The first one was how would you fund
sidewalks?
Okay.
Are very expensive.
So obviously there was an initiative to fill the gap that passed. One of the problems that happened with that initiative is it passed, but then other transportation money was diverted other places, and I think that basically we have to get back to what I would call we have to get back to basics. There are many things that I would like to do as mayor, but first we have to fund the basics, because if the basics don't work in a city, like sidewalks, like some of our water and sewer systems or whatever, if those don't function, and there is a climate catastrophe or an earthquake, people suffer, and particularly people at the lower end, as we've seen in other cities. So we're going to have to go back, and I hope, once again, send a measure out to the people around the issue of basics, around the issue of infrastructure. But we're also going to have to make a promise that when that money comes in, we're not going to use that to backfill existing money. So that's the answer to the first part of the question. The second was around light rail in New Zealand and Australia. So again, this goes back to what I said in the beginning. We have to come up with a common vision on transit. And part of that common vision is what can we actually afford, and when can we afford it? And over time, I think you can build out a larger transit system, but you have to decide what you can afford. Is bus rapid transit the most effective? So one of the questions you also have to ask yourself is, what's the most effective way to move people? Is it bus rapid transit? Is it light rail? By the way, I support the current light rail and believe we need to move forward, so don't take that as an either or, the old arguments about should we do one or the other. But I think there are ways to supplement light rail, and I think we're going to have to ask ourselves questions, not just what is most effective, but what can we afford. And those, if we answer those questions based on facts, I think that we can come up with the solution about which works best.
Okay. Issues that are Olympia issues, but that also roll back into the city as well. What can we do to increase the range of affordable housing options available? And what can we do to strengthen public disclosure laws? And what can we do to make sure that the city complies with public records?
Okay. So the first one had to do with affordable housing. During the time I was chair of the capital budget, we doubled the amount of money that we put in the Housing Trust Fund, which is the basis for any affordable housing project or low-income housing project in this state, regardless of who you are or where you are. We doubled it at that point, and we've doubled it again, and our hope again is to increase that. Our Housing Trust Fund is considered a model across the nation because we put our state dollars on the table with tax credits that are available to the private sector, to the banks, so that when somebody goes to, like Plymouth Housing or whoever builds affordable housing, goes to the private entity with those public dollars, they're able to use those tax credits, and basically for every dollar the state puts in, they get like $5 to $7 leverage out of the private sector. Very successful program. Successful at the state level, it's one we might want to explore at the city level. The third part of that question was?
Well, good question.
About bike licensing fees.
Oh, that was a while ago, yeah, bike licensing.
No,
fees.
I don't.
That was a long time ago.
So there's a guy in Southwest Washington who wants to put fees on bikes because he says that when people ride bikes, they actually create, greenhouse gases. So that wasn't me. That was another legislator named Ed Orcutt, not Ed Murray. I don't believe that we should put fees on bicycles. Two reasons. One, because we're trying to encourage people to get out of their cars. We're trying to encourage healthy communities. I don't think fees are the answer to do those two things. And as I've heard from some of the small bike owners bike shop owners in my own district, they think their margins are pretty close down. It wouldn't be helpful to their small businesses that are in our neighborhoods.
No, the follow-up to the other question at Olympia level was the weakening of the Public Records Act and exemptions from public disclosure, and then what can we do to strengthen public records reporting within Seattle?
And so what we can do in Seattle, I actually don't know the answer to it, because my experience of the time I worked in Seattle is Seattle was far more transparent than other places.
Is it legal to exceed the law? Is it?
No, right. No,
You can do more.
You can do more, and Seattle generally has done more. So there's a bit of a tension here that the state is trying to manage, and that is at the request of local governments. There is, for some local governments, they're receiving so many requests from certain individuals that tend to be the same individuals that the cost of disclosing all that information and constantly churning out that information has become a real problem. So what the state has tried to struggle with at the state level is, how do you give people access to everything they need and want and control costs? And I don't have an easy answer for that. The one thing I can say is we're rated by Governing Magazine and others at the legislative level as one of the most transparent places to find information. You can go online, you can see the bills, you can see the bill reports, you can see the fiscal notes. You usually can see them in real time as they come up in committees. So that level of transparency is there.
And this is related to growth and development. Is there any reason that Seattle can't include neighborhood planning and zoning to ensure there are sufficient parks and services to match new development? We do not follow an environmental process that looks at cumulative impacts of development in this city. And what would you do to ensure that schools and medical services and so on are available to all neighborhoods?
Well, again, school and medical services, I think those are good examples to bring up. Of course, a mayor doesn't control the schools, as I said, and doesn't control certainly the medical services. But it takes leadership to bring these other areas together to coordinate how we move forward. So that's maybe point two. Point one is, I think that when this current mayor did away with what Mayor Rice and Mayor Royer had, and Mayor Nichols, which was a centralized area of planning, we lost a lot of opportunities to look at things holistically. And so there are great departments doing great things in individual silos. But for me, the missing piece, and this gets at the heart of the question about how we plan overall for the city, is I believe we need to return to some centralized planning mechanism that brings in the various aspects of schools, of density, of preserving our neighborhoods. Are there enough parks? And do we need more parks in a particular area? And brings that together again in a strategic planning department to basically do, and this is one of the first things I would do as mayor when I recreated what used to exist, is I would do a stress test on those very things. I would do a stress test, not unlike what the Obama administration did when they looked at the state of our economy 6 years ago when they took over, or 5 years ago when they took over. I think we need to look at what's working and what's not working. Where are those gaps? But I don't think you can do that in the current silo approach. I think you can only do that through an integrated planning mechanism that the mayor oversees and then has the ability through that planning mechanism to make sure that those things are being carried out at the level that they're carried out. We have an incredible thing happening in North Seattle. Growth is happening. Kids are moving back into North Seattle. The crisis is that we don't have the schools to deal with the growth of the kids coming into our schools. And I think basically the city's approach is, well, we manage the neighborhood part, but the school district has to manage that other part. I don't think that works. I think the city has to be a player in deciding how we figure out that problem, because otherwise those young families with young kids are going to go back to the burbs.
Okay, a few very Seattle-specific questions. Over 10 firefighters earned over $200,000 in 2012, which will have a major impact on both budget and the pension funds. What will you do to control overtime hours for the departments, which potentially can bankrupt these items?
So let me go to the second piece around pension and then come to overtime. There's a current proposal that is floating around. Our pension system is in trouble in the city of Seattle. And the State Investment Board has been able, throughout the recession, to basically get returns of 7 or 8%. During the Great Recession, the State Investment Board that manages the state pensions. Except for the old pensions that were closed in the 70s, all the state pensions are fully funded and some are actuarially overfunded. I think Seattle seriously should consider putting our retirement system into the State Investment Board and allow the State Investment Board to invest those dollars. Their returns have been higher for their retirees and their pensions than the city's has. I also think that you kind of, the scale of it is just, massive compared to the cities. Overtime, I think, is something that has to be negotiated with the unions, and there has to be some sort of clear in those negotiations, agreements put together about what are reasonable levels of overtime, taking in consideration that there are rare crises with fires, and that the fire department has to understand that, and as every department does, that we have financial issues, that we can't pay for everything, which kind of brings me back to a question I didn't answer, which was one of your 5 questions. Right now the budget is doing better because Seattle's economy is doing better than the rest of the state, but we do not have a sustainable budget in the city of Seattle. And we're seriously going to have to look at our revenue sources, the type of revenue sources, and where those revenue sources go. And that discussion is what I mean when I say in negotiations with the unions from the fire department, they have to understand that. If you have an unsustainable sources of revenue, you can't sustain that level of overtime.
There are a number of areas in the city where there's very bad congestion. In this particular instance, they're talking about the Montlake Boulevard, Montlake Cut, with Children's Hospital expansion, a new light rail station, and the changes in the 520 interchange at that point. Do you have any suggestions on how to deal with that type of issue?
Yeah, I do. That the legislature should never have rolled the Speaker of the House and Representative Peterson and myself and suspended legislation that we passed that said that 520 cannot go forward until mitigation is addressed on the west side of the bridge. The bridge, the governor and I, and you and I know this issue very well. The last governor and I had a rather long-running battle over how you finance the 520 bridge. The current structure, even without getting to the issue of the Seattle side, is not a sustainable financial plan. It is not. I've given I fought. It's like if you want to point out an area where I feel like I didn't bring home the success I wanted, this would be one of them. But where I disagree with my fellow members of the Seattle City Council is my fellow members of the Seattle City Council met with legislators legislators and local officials from the east side and said that they would decide how to mitigate the west side. When they did that, we lost a lot of leverage in Olympia. It was one of the angriest days, I think, of my time in the legislature, because we needed the city of Seattle to come to Olympia united and say, you're not going to do this to our neighborhoods. Now, I've described the problem and I've whined a little bit. How do we get to a solution? The state is in need of an additional revenue package, not just on the roadside, but on the bus side as well. There is no way that an additional transportation package, which will end up on the ballot, will ever pass this in this state without districts like the 43rd, the 46th, the 36th voting about 80% for it. So I can tell you, if they want to fix the issue of mitigation in Montlake and the other impacted areas of 520, that money has to be in that new package. Because if it isn't, the referendum or the initiative will fail. And I'll give you an example. In 2002, the legislature sent out referendum 51. It failed by 20 points statewide, but in my district, it only got 50% of the vote. My district votes 85% for every tax that's on the ballot, except for stadiums. Then they vote no. But if they think that they can get by with the package and not deal with the issue of financing the mitigation on the west side of 520, then they're smoking something that is not yet legal. So.
Almost, though.
And I just said that on tape.
The UW intends to build housing above the light rail station in the University District, the North End University District. Although the public, many people are advocating for a public plaza. Do you have a position on that particular development?
Yeah, so first of all, I think you bring communities together to plan and make decisions. And I think one of the undeveloped parts of the Sound Transit program was that there was no real station planning in a significant way that looked at what works best. Does the area need more park space? Does the area need more retail? How do you make the place vibrant and alive? My concern about a plaza, quite honestly, is the issue of open plazas and transit station. There's some history of those not being particularly attractive areas after a few years. I personally probably prefer, given the amount of open space that exists at the University of Washington itself, that we try and come up with some sort of mix, some open space, some retail, and some housing. Here's an area, the U District, where there is potential for density because we're not getting rid of any single-family homes. And I think this station offers us an opportunity to do that. I don't think it has to exclude open space. But I think a plaza by itself, I have real concerns about what that would look like and how that would function. I wish I was getting the questions in one-on-one.
Yeah, no, you're doing great.
No, but I miss the interaction. So.
Yeah, I know. Unfortunately, this group has a great propensity to.
Well, I like that.
So. Question, so I'm trying
So
to
I
keep it
just.
short and sweet.
You're lucky.
Ed, related to civil rights, there is a move to put in surveillance cameras in parts of Seattle, and another. Well, why don't you answer that question first? Do you have a position on surveillance cameras?
In areas such as school zones, school crossing zones, school walking zones.
Those are speed cameras.
Yeah. Okay. So you're talking about just general surveillance cameras. I'm opposed.
You're opposed.
I'm opposed. I was thinking about the debates we have in Olympia about whether we should have traffic cameras at all. So I just kind of defaulted and went there. No, I don't. I would hate to be have to live in London where I didn't feel like I had any downtime, where I could take my dog for a walk and no one was looking at me.
What would you do to reduce the power of money in politics and increase the power of the average citizen over corporate entities?
Wow, that is a outstanding question. First of all, I have to tell you, as far as money in politics in Seattle, I think Seattle does a pretty good job. Any one of you, should you want to, actually, and this is theoretical, I'm not making an ask, any one of you could give to my campaign total $700 for the race for mayor. If you were going to give to me as a legislator, you could give to me close to $2,000. The money in politics has grown exponentially. The money in politics that is moving it through our, as a result of Citizens United that flowed through various campaign coffers on both sides this year was unbelievable. The cost of passing R-74 was $12 million. Unless we get control of that, it corrupts the system and it demoralizes individual people. There's not a lot that we can do, and I don't say this as there's nothing we can do. There's not a lot that we can do until we can deal with the issue of the Citizens United that made corporations and freed up, and the decisions to free up all the money, take away all the campaign restrictions. I'm very afraid of court decisions going forward that could take off some of the campaign restrictions that we all have in place in this state and in this city. Having said that, we need federal action. So that's number one. We need federal action so that we can put limits and prevent some of this money from moving around. What we can continue to do at the local level is transparency. And transparency is the other half of controlling money. The ability of you all to see who gives me money and who gives all my colleagues money. And the fact that people are now doing that, not just looking at it, but analyzing it and sending it out around on various blog sites, is one of the best things that's happened to money in politics and democracy. It really does make people think twice about who they're going to take a check from. So I can't say enough about that part of it, which we have a lot of control on, and which we continue to try and make more and more the technology better and better at the Public Disclosure Commission.
What is your position on developer impact fees, and what can we do to make our development be more green, preparing for a peak oil city where we need more resiliency?
The last word, peak.
Resiliency. Peak oil,
okay.
And resiliency versus just business as usual.
Okay, to go back to the last question, the other thing I would like to see us go back to, when I worked for Martha Cho and she ran for office, for every $50 she raised, she got a $50 match. It allows more people to participate in politics. Regrettably, the state did away with that program. It is my hope at some point that we can bring that sort of matching funds back. I think it is another way to allow average people to participate by actually being candidates. But going back to the question, and I'm sorry I left that part out, but going back to this question.
What's your position on impact fees, and what can we do to make developers produce greener buildings for our peak oil future?
Okay. So I support impact fees. I think, though, that we need to have a more sophisticated approach. The city has to have a more sophisticated approach in how it levels those impact fees. Not all development is the same. And I think we have to have a better understanding of the market and what a particular development can withstand as an impact fee. But they need to be there, but I think we should be smart about them. And I think some are worth a lot more, and some we can ask a lot more out of, and others I don't think we can ask as much. And it has to do with scale, again, around developments in different neighborhoods. When I mentioned infrastructure at the beginning as one of the main things I want to target over the next 4 years, and that gets to the issue of the question around how do we get developers to create more green buildings. Well, if we are going to build a city of the future that can survive climate change and changing resources, then we are going to have to develop approaches that require developers, either through incentives, usually it's a combination of incentives and sticks, to develop those buildings. I believe we can actually maybe develop a program to work with some developers to create model developments to show how that developer can actually save money by a model development. So that when people see, particularly developers, see that they can do something that's both for the public good, but it saves them money, it's a great way to get them there. And there are models that have been developed around the country. Dennis Hayes building that is just opened up on Capitol Hill, a green building, a great example that you can build an office building and you can make it with a zero, carbon building. Those are possible, and you can do them, in expensive neighborhoods, and you can make them work.
Okay, this has been, it has to be reduced to a yes/no question. Do you support district elections for city council members in Seattle?
That's not fair.
Sorry, you talked too long on the last question.
Generally, I support the concept. I haven't had a chance to look at the current proposal.
Ed, thank you very much.
That's it? That was easy.